Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday, Yom Sheni. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Monday? Stephen in New Hampshire, Renee in Indiana, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Melissa in Great Neck, Yehud in South Carolina, Shandor in the Bronx, John in Maine, Nancy in North Carolina, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Lucy in Minnesota, Belle in Texas, Haim in Florida, Aoife in Florida, Ella in Southern California, Marie in Freeport, New York, and Alan in New York City. Tonight's episode of AT Daily is sponsored by our own Yehudit in South Carolina. My aunt, Leah Bas Rochel, was recently diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And although her surgery did not go as planned, soon she is starting a long and tiring chemo process. Just today, she told me that everything is in the will of Hashem. She is courageous and a woman with a lot of perseverance. I would like to dedicate a learning in her honor and refuah shlema, a complete healing. Would also like to wish healing to everyone who needs it, both physically and mentally. What a beautiful dedication, Yehudit. May your aunt have a complete and speedy recovery. And everyone else who you've blessed with a recovery should have it also. We say Amen. And Yehudit, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings, in the merit of enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And we all say Amen. If you'd like to dedicate an episode of AT Daily, donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. Okay. We are on page 92. We got a little bit of a head start on the page yesterday, so I would guesstimate that we're about maybe like a fifth to a quarter of the way into it on page 92a. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 11 of Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. We're going to have a bunch of teachings today from Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, any communal leader who leads the community calmly, without anger, and honestly, is privileged and leads them in the world to come. Olam haba. As it is stated, for he that has compassion upon them will lead them, even by the springs of water shall he guide them. So just as he led them in this world, so too he will guide them in the world to come. I would say that most of the time when I'm speaking to people, especially speaking to a group, I'm pretty calm. But when I'm on my own, I really needed this teaching today because I was just wrestling with passwords and usernames and, when some organization that I only have to log into to pay a bill once a year and they force you to reset the password and then they mail the reset code to an email address that I no longer have access to and which I changed on this website last year and probably the year before and the year before that. and they keep mailing it to the wrong place. I mean, so it's a test. And even in those private moments, please, God, give me the strength to just accept that. Why am I getting all angry? Okay, so I can't get through it as fast as I would have liked. Okay, so I fall behind and I can't get through all the work that I'd like to do today. Why should I become angry? That's lack of emunah, lack of trust. So for whatever reason, I had to be delayed today. I need to accept that. It's a great teaching. I know it's the right thing to do. Knowing is not necessarily putting it into practice every day, but I keep reminding myself I got to do that, and I ask God for help, and then I get a little bit better at it. Okay. The Gemara now, having mentioned a teaching of Rabbi Elazar that alludes to this world and the next, now that we brought in Rabbi Elazar, the Gemara will cite additional statements by Rabbi Elazar relating not so much to the world to come, but rather to recommended conduct. So Rabbi Elazar says, great is knowledge, as it was placed between two oisios, which really means letters, but in this case refers to two names of God. As it is stated, for a God of knowledge is the Lord, right? So kikel, and I'm putting a cuff in front of that so that I don't use God's name in vain, right? For God, a God of knowledge is God, right? And so we'll use one name of God before Dea, which means knowledge, or in this case, Deos. And then another name of God afterwards. So the idea that the word for knowledge, there's a few different syntaxes in which it could appear, but the point is that the word for knowledge appears between two names of God. So Rabbi Elazar is telling us, great is knowledge. In other words, how important, how holy, how wonderful, how desirable it is that we should be constantly increasing our Torah knowledge by learning Torah. And Rabbi Elazar says, great is the holy temple, as it too was placed between two letters, which is to say, two names of God. As it is stated, the place in which to dwell that you have made, Lord, the temple, Lord, which your hands have prepared, in Exodus 15:17. So Rav Ada Karchina objects to the explanation that being placed between two names of God accords significance to a concept like the Holy Temple or knowledge. These are great things, but just because it occurs in the Torah or in the Bible between two names of gods doesn't necessarily make it greater. This is Rav Ada Karchina's objection. And so this is how he proves it. He says that, well, if that is so, that being placed between two names of God gives significance to something, prominence to it, well, then the same should hold true for the concept of vengeance. And shall one say from Psalm 94, great is vengeance, as it was placed between two letters, because it is written in Psalm 94, God of vengeance, Lord, God of vengeance, shine forth, right? God of vengeance, Lord, right? So vengeance comes between two names of God. So we're going to say that vengeance is a great concept, is a great thing in this world, and somehow compare it to knowledge of God through Torah and the Holy Temple itself. Sounds like a pretty good objection from Rav Ada. So Rabbi Elazar said to him, well, in this context, indeed, vengeance is great, in accordance with the statement of Ula. As Ula says with regard to these two appearances, O Lord, God to whom vengeance belongs, God to whom vengeance belongs, appear, which is Psalm 94, verse 1. And in Deuteronomy 33:2, where it says, he appeared from Mount Paran. So why are both of these verses necessary in the Bible? One, the second verse in Deuteronomy is necessary for the attribute of divine good, with which God gave the Torah at Mount Sinai. And the other use of this word appear, along with God, vengeance, God, in Psalm 94, this is necessary to communicate the attribute of divine punishment, with which God exacts vengeance against the enemies and oppressors of the Jewish people. Yeah, when God takes vengeance on our behalf against our enemies who try to kill us and oppress us, yeah, vengeance is wonderful. And Rabbi Lazar says, with regard to any person in whom there is knowledge, it is as though the temple was built in his days, as this, knowledge, was placed between two letters, and that, temple, was placed between two letters, as we said above. So knowledge, one who increases his Torah learning, it's as if he's building the holy temple in our time. And Rabbi Lazar also says, any person in whom there is knowledge ultimately becomes wealthy, as it is stated, and by knowledge are the chambers filled with all precious and pleasant riches, from Proverbs 24:4. And Rabbi Lazar also says, with regard to any person in whom there is no knowledge, it is prohibited to have mercy on him, as it is stated, for it is a people of no understanding. Therefore its maker will have no mercy on them, and its creator will show them no favor. Isaiah 27:11. And if God has no mercy upon them, all the more so should people not show them mercy. So what are we talking about? On the surface, this sounds very harsh. You're saying that somebody who hasn't merited to run into and become curious about Torah, and so he hasn't been learning Torah, so we should have no mercy on him? Not quite. Not quite. Here's a lovely explanation that, here's some possibilities, right? And a note from Rav Steinsaltz. Two possibilities. The first is like this. Some say the reference here is specifically to one who does not wish to study and accumulate knowledge. And it is upon him that it is prohibited to have mercy. Okay, it's not somebody who, didn't know that it was his obligation to learn Torah and never had an opportunity to learn it. No, this is somebody who knows he should be learning and has an opportunity to learn and chooses not to. Okay, that's a little bit strong. But others explain that the reference is to one who misuses the intellect with which he was blessed, and in doing so, he compromises his human essence and is no longer deserving of mercy. Actually, that one's pretty similar to the first. But here's the third explanation. Others explain this statement simply like this. It is prohibited to have mercy upon one who lacks knowledge and requests from us an item from us who know that the item will cause the other harm. It is prohibited to have mercy upon him and give him what he requested. In other words, if a Jew asks me to buy him some ham for lunch, no, I don't buy that for him. Okay? I keep kosher, he doesn't. He doesn't know maybe that he shouldn't be eating ham, or he knows he doesn't care. But he's so hungry, he's salivating, he's craving a ham sandwich. And so I might be tempted to feel bad and just give him what he wants. No, that's what it means. You don't have mercy on his inappropriate request and give him that, by which he's going to harm himself because he's going to transgress and eat what he should not be eating. And Rabbi Lazar also says, with regard to one who gives his bread to one without knowledge, afflictions befall him, as it is stated, they who eat your bread will place mazor under you, in whom there is no discernment. This is from Obadiah 1:7. And what is mazor? This means nothing other than afflictions, based on the parallel with another verse, as it is stated, and Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah his wound, mizoro, from Hosea 5:13. So this indicates that one who gives his bread to one without discernment will ultimately fall ill. And Rabbi Lazar also says, any person in whom there is no knowledge is ultimately exiled, as it is stated, therefore my people are exiled for lack of knowledge. It's not so surprising. Natural consequence. If Jews aren't aware of what their obligations are as Jews, pretty soon they'll, turn their intellect and their desire for spirituality to something inappropriate. Okay, and then eventually becomes idolatry and they're exiled from the land. God forbid. Okay, where am I? And says Rabbi Lazar, with regard to any house in which there are no matters of Torah heard at night, the fire consumes it. One interpretation, this means the fires of Gehenna, right? So ultimately these people will have to spend time in Gehenna. Or the literal meaning, the fire consumes it. As it is stated, all darkness is laid up for his treasures. A fire not fanned shall consume him. It shall go ill with a sarid in his tent, from Job 20:26. And sarid, this word, is referring to no one but a Torah scholar. As it is stated, and among the seridim, those whom the Lord shall call. Joel 3:5. So what does this mean? A house that is dark at night and in which no Torah is heard will be consumed by a fire that does not require fanning with a bellows. So this is the fire of Gehenna, right? But again, the literal meaning is if you're not, teaching and learning Torah in your house becomes more vulnerable to fire, God forbid. And Rabbi Lazar says anyone who does not benefit Torah scholars from his property never sees a sign of blessing. As it is stated, none of his food shall remain, sarid. Therefore his prosperity shall not endure, from Job 20:21. So sarid is referring to no one but Torah scholars. As it is stated, and among the seridim, those whom the Lord shall call. No prosperity will come to one who does not share his food with a Torah scholar. So find a yeshiva that you believe in, or some other person teaching Torah, and support them. Donate. This will be healthy for you. And Rabbi Lazar says anyone who does not leave bread on his table at the end of his meal, indicating his gratitude to God for providing him more than enough, never sees a sign of blessing. As it is stated, none of his food shall remain, therefore his prosperity shall not endure. Now, I'm really glad that we're running into this because we learned, in the not so distant past, that first of all, when you're eating a meal, right? So even if you've had a huge steak dinner with potatoes and salad and soup and, a 3-course dinner, 4-course dinner, 5-course dinner, but if you didn't have bread with it, it wasn't a meal, halachically speaking, right? Under Jewish law, that's like a big snack. So if you want to have a meal, and if you're having a big, beautiful meal, of course you want it to legally be a meal, so then you have to have bread with it, right? So if you're a Jew and you have bread with your meal, even if you only have a morsel of bread, now it is a meal, and that means that you have to wash and say a blessing over the hand washing before the meal. Then you keep your mouth shut until you get to your bread, and you say a blessing over the bread, right? Hamotzi lechem min haaretz is the ending of the blessing. And then you eat the bread, and then you can start speaking again. Okay, so now you're in meal mode. And that means that when you finish the meal, you're going to have to recite the grace after the meal, the full grace after a meal, which is the Birkat Hamazon. Okay, so we're saying the grace after the meal, and it's somewhat lengthy, and that's why people kind of lazy out of having a meal because they know they're going to have to bench. It's called benching, right? Benching is Yiddish for bless, and they're going to have to bless after the meal by reciting the whole Birkat Hamazon. Okay, so obviously when it's a Shabbos dinner or Shabbos lunch, of course, we're going to wash, we're going to bless the bread, we're going to eat, we're going to enjoy the meal, and then we're going to bench afterward. What we learned not that long ago is that when you're benching after the meal, the bread, right, some morsels of the bread still need to be on the table. That's just, and we just learned that as a minhag, as a custom, that it's the normal thing that you must still have that bread on the table. You might be clearing, right, the table as you go. You take off the plates from the first course or the soup course or the main course when you're having dessert. But the breadboard, right, and hopefully some of the uneaten bread, needs to still be on the table when you're benching. And that's what we were told. The bread, some of the bread still needs to be on the table when you're benching. I didn't know why. Now we know why. Right? Anyone who does not leave bread on his table at the end of his meal, which indicates his gratitude to God for providing him more than enough. If you don't do that, you will never see a sign of blessing. As it is stated, none of his food shall remain, therefore his prosperity shall not endure. Now the Gemara asks, but doesn't Rabbi Lazar say, with regard to anyone who leaves pieces of bread on his table, it is as if he worships idols, as it is stated, who prepare a table for fortune, meaning Gad, and offer blended wine for destiny, not God, Gad. Okay, so that's Isaiah 65:11. So what's going on? The people would leave pieces of bread on the table as an offering to the constellation Gad, which they believed influences the fortune of the home. Constellation? What do you mean the constellation? Okay, so they're acknowledging that there's only one God in the world, but they're saying that, God's blessing comes into the world through channels, and maybe these channels are influenced by the stars, and therefore they're leaving some bread on the table as some kind of an offering to one of those constellations. That's not sounding good. That's starting to sound a little bit like the sin of the golden calf. So the Gemara answers, well, this apparent contradiction is not difficult. And it says that this practice of believing that the constellations, can affect the fortunes of the home, which may be true, but giving an offering to the constellations, that's idol worship. So the Gemara answers, this apparent contradiction is not difficult. This case, where leaving pieces of bread is a form of idol worship, this applies when there is a whole loaf together with the pieces, as the addition of the pieces is clearly for idol worship. In that case, where failure to leave bread on the table is criticized, applies when there is no whole loaf together with the pieces. Now, wait a minute. Very often we have 2 loaves of bread on the table. Certainly we do on Shabbos. And maybe we don't get into the second loaf. So it could certainly happen that there is a whole loaf and some pieces. Are we running afoul of this? It seems to me like what they're talking about is if you bring out more bread, with this idolatry, with this idea of an offering to the constellation in mind, that would be idolatrous. Leaving bread on the table. Now here's the law according to Shulchan Aruch. It is appropriate for one to leave bread on his table, and it is a sign of blessing. Nevertheless, one should not bring a whole loaf and place it on the table when there are already pieces of bread on the table. Right? So you don't bring out more bread for the purpose of having bread on the table while you're benching if there's already bread there. Then it would become that idolatrous practice. Okay. And more statements of Rabbi Elazar. He says, with regard to anyone who amends the truth in his speech, it is as though he worships idols. What? As is written there in the verse where Jacob sought to resist taking his father's blessing from Esau, and I shall seem to him a deceiver. This is what when he's arguing with his mother. She wants him to trick his father Yitzhak in order to get the blessing. He doesn't want to do it. And Rivka says, trust me, I know what I'm doing. But his argument was, I don't want to be a deceiver. Genesis 27:12. And it is written there with regard to idol worship, they are vanity, the work of deception. Jeremiah 10:15. Right? So when you tell lies, there's some element of idolatry in that. Maybe now and then, like telling a groom at a wedding that his bride is beautiful, even though maybe she's not so beautiful, that kind of a lie is sanctioned, according to Beis Hillel, to help the groom rejoice. But when you're actually telling lies, especially lies that have to do with your business, right? Then that is like saying, oh, well, I can get away with this because, I can get away with it. Which is sort of, and it's idolatry because God sees everything, right? So the stuff that you do in private, where for sure you're not going to get caught, and therefore you're like, well, okay, I can do it because no one's going to know. Yeah, but God's going to know. And if you do it anyway, it's like you're saying God is not watching, or God doesn't care, or God doesn't exist, God forbid, right? So that's why there's a hint of idolatry in lies. And Rabbi Elazar says, with regard to anyone who looks at nakedness, right? somebody who looks at nudity that is prohibited to him. His bow is emptied, i.e. he will be robbed of his potency. As it is stated, your bow, B-O-W, is stripped bare, area, in Habakkuk 3:9. Also, Rabbi Lazar says, forever be in the dark, i.e. anonymous, right? Be humble, don't seek fame, and you will continue to exist. Rabbi Zayris says we learn a similar idea in the Mishna as well, Negayim 2:3. In a dark house, one does not open windows to illuminate it in order to see whether or not its blemish is tzaras. And the house retains the presumptive status of tahara, not being tameh through tzaras. So these matters that are obscured are allowed to continue. And the Gemara affirms, conclude from that Mishnah that this is so. So there's certain conditions where a house might have tzaras. It doesn't have tzaras. Even if the stains are totally there, and later when a priest comes and says, yeah, your house has tzaras, but the house does not officially have tzaras until the priest comes and with sufficient light sees it and declares that this house has tzaras. Therefore, if there's not sufficient light inside that house and the light can't be brought in, it actually will never become a house with tzaras for that reason, because it officially does not have tzaras until the priest says so. Very interesting situation. We don't have this anymore, right? Tzaras is a physical expression of a spiritual malady, and we don't have that anymore in the modern world. In the ancient world, we did. But metaphorically, right, people who are just like humble, stay in the back, not seeking the spotlight, live longer. Now the Gemara returns to the topic of the source for resurrection of the dead in the Torah. Where do we find that in the Torah? It's always an allusion, it's not explicit. So Rabbi Tavi says that Rabbi Yoshia says, what is the meaning of that which is written? There are three that are never satisfied: the grave, the barren womb, and earth that does not receive sufficient water. Proverbs 30, verses 15 and 16. What does a grave have to do with a womb? Rather, they are juxtaposed to say to you, just as a womb takes in and gives forth, so too a grave takes in and gives forth. How does a womb take in and give forth? Well, it takes in a fertilized egg, and then it gives forth a baby. What does a grave do? Takes in a corpse, and in the Messianic age will give forth a resurrected living person. And are these matters not inferred kal v'chomer? It is with regard to a womb into which one introduces the embryo in secret, and one removes the baby from it accompanied by the loud sounds of the woman crying out during childbirth, then with regard to the grave, into which one introduces the corpse with sounds of crying and the mourning for the dead, is it not right that one removes from it the resurrected dead, accompanied by the loud sounds of the resurrected multitudes? And from here there is a response to those who say there is no resurrection of the dead derived from the Torah. And the school of Eliyahu taught, the righteous whom the Holy One, blessed be He, is destined to resurrect, do not return to their dust, as it is stated, and it shall come to pass that he who remains in Zion and he who remains in Jerusalem shall be called holy. Anyone who is written unto life in Jerusalem, Isaiah 4:3. What does this mean? Just as the Holy One exists forever, so too will they exist forever. Now 92b. And if you say, during those years when the Holy One, blessed be He, is destined to renew His world, as it is stated, and the Lord alone shall be exalted on that day, from Isaiah 2:11, what are the righteous to do? How will they survive? The Holy One, blessed be He, will make wings like eagles for them, and they will fly over the surface of the water, as it is stated. Therefore, we will not fear when God changes the land, and when the mountains are moved in the midst of the sea, from Psalm 46. Although God will renew the land, they will not fear, because they will be in the sky over the sea at that time. And lest you say that they will endure suffering from flying uninterrupted for an extended period. The verse states, but they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. And they shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and shall not tire. Isaiah 40, verse 31. And the Gemara suggests, and let us derive from the dead that Ezekiel revived. See Ezekiel chapter 37, that the resurrected dead will not live forever, but they will die at some point. And the Gemara explains, the school of Eliyahu holds in accordance with the opinion of the one who says, in truth, Ezekiel's depiction of the dry bones that came to life was a parable from which nothing can be derived with regard to the nature of resurrection of the dead at the end of days. And this is as it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer says, the dead that Ezekiel revived stood on their feet and recited song to God, and then they died. And what song did they recite? The Lord kills with justice and gives life with mercy. Rabbi Yehoshua says that it was the song that they recited, the Lord kills and gives life, he lowers to the grave and elevates, from 1 Samuel 2:6. And Rabbi Yehuda says Ezekiel's depiction of the dry bones that came to life was truth, and it was a parable. Rabbi Nehemiah said to Rabbi Yehuda, well, if it was truth, why do you refer to it as a parable? Was it a teaching story or did it happen? And if it was a parable, why do you refer to it as truth? Rather, it means, in truth, it was a parable. So Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, says, not only was it not a parable, but the dead that Ezekiel revived ascended to Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and they married wives, and they fathered sons and daughters. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, who we've seen many times in the Gemara, stood on his feet and said, I am a descendant of their sons. Right? These dry bones that Ezekiel brought up and resurrected, then after they were brought back to life, got married and fathered children. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera says he's a descendant of one of them. And he said, these are the tefillin that my father's father left me from them. The resurrected dead from Ezekiel got busy being Jewish again and had tefillin. And he has the tefillin from one of them. The Gemara asks, and who are the dead that Ezekiel revived in Ezekiel 37? So Rav says these were the descendants of Ephraim. Right? So the tribe of Ephraim, like Ephraim and Manasseh, these were the children of Joseph. And Jacob elevated them, those two tribes, to be on the level with his other sons. Right? The 12 sons of Jacob essentially became 13 tribes because Ephraim and Manasseh replaced Joseph. Right? Joseph's two sons became tribes at the level of Jacob's other sons. And so there were 13 tribes that sort of entered the land. 12 tribes inherited land because the descendants of one of Jacob's sons, Levi, I'm one of them, did not get land, right? God said the Levites are my portion. They don't get land, but they will receive tithes. And then they tended to live in the cities, the Levitical cities. Okay, so who are these descendants of Ephraim who ended up dead in a valley and Ezekiel revived them, resurrected them? It's not all the descendants of Ephraim, but it's some. So Rav says these were the descendants of Ephraim who calculated the time of the end of the enslavement in Egypt and the redemption, and they erred in their calculation. Right? They jumped the gun. Before God sent Moses to say to Pharaoh, let my people go, and he let all the children of Israel out, there were some groups who earlier than that said, yeah, enough, we want out. It's time to get out of Egypt. And they figured that, they did their calculations based on, the Bible wasn't written yet, but based on the oral teachings that were passed down from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob and through their children now in the land of Egypt. And they said, yeah, no, it's now. According to the calculations, this is happening now. So God will bless us and protect us if we leave now. But their calculations were off. God had not yet sent Moses. And when they tried to, escape and walk out of Egypt, it did not work out for them. They left before the appointed time and they were killed. As it is stated, quote, and the sons of Ephraim Shusala, and buried his son, and Tachas his son, and Eliada his son, and Tachas his son, and Zabad his son, and Shusala his son, and Ezer and Eliad, whom the men of Gas that were born in the land slew of Gas, because they came down to take their cattle. Let's learn that in 1 Chronicles 7:20 and 21. And it is written, and Ephraim their father mourned many days, and his brothers came to comfort him. And Shmuel says, these dead that Ezekiel revived. Okay, so that's one explanation of who the dead were, right? These early leavers who didn't go well for them, coming out of Egypt from the tribe of Ephraim. That's one idea according to Rav. Another idea from Shmuel. Shmuel says, these dead that Ezekiel revived were people who denied the resurrection of the dead. As it is stated, then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried and our hope is lost. We are cut off. Ezekiel 37:11. So God tells Ezekiel that these were people who had lost hope for resurrection, but apparently they didn't lose their place because Ezekiel revived them. Rabbi Yirmi of our Abba says something different. These were people in whom there was not even the moist residue of a mitzvah. As it is stated, these dry bones hear the word of the Lord. Ezekiel 37:4. So even during their lifetime, they were comparable to dry bones. These were people who did not get a place in the world to come because they had no mitzvahs to be merit for them. And so they were going to just lie there forever. But apparently God had mercy on them and sent Ezekiel to revive them. Rabbi Yitzhak Napacha says, these are the people who covered the sanctuary with repugnant creatures and creeping animals, as it is stated. Quote, so I entered and saw, and behold, every form of creeping animal and repugnant animal, and all the idols of the house of Israel etched upon the wall around. From Ezekiel 8:10. And it is written there with regard to the prophecy of the dry bones, and he passed me over them around and around. Ezekiel 37:2. So by means of a verbal analogy between around in one verse and the identical term in the other, it is derived that the two verses are referring to the same people. Rabbi Yochanan says something different. These are the dead from the Dura valley, from the book of Daniel, chapter 3. And Rabbi Yochanan says these corpses filled the area from the Eshel River to Rabat, which constitutes the Dura Valley. And as at the time that Nebuchadnezzar, the wicked, exiled the Jewish people to Bavel after he destroyed the first temple, there were among them youths who overshadowed the sun with their beauty. And the Chaldean women would see them and desire them and discharge a flow of zava. And these women told their husbands, and their husbands told the king. And the king ordered the youths executed, and his servants executed them. And their execution did not resolve the problem, as the women were still discharging the flow of zava. Right? These non-Jewish women who were so turned on by these very handsome young Jewish men. So even after death, the youth's beauty remained intact. And the king ordered that their corpses be taken to the valley, and his servants trampled them, so that their form would no longer be visible. And it's these, young men who not only were exiled from Israel and sent to Babel, but then they were destroyed because they were too handsome. It was these young men who were buried in this ignominious way in the Dura Valley, and Ezekiel revived them, according to Rabbi Yochanan. Now, the sages taught in a Baraisa, at the moment that Nebuchadnezzar the wicked cast Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah into the fiery furnace, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Ezekiel, go and revive the dead in the Dura Valley. So once Ezekiel revived them, the bones came and struck Nebuchadnezzar, the wicked man, in his face. And Nebuchadnezzar said, what is the nature of this? What is the nature of these? And his servant said to him, the friend of these three, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, is reviving the dead in the Dura Valley. And Nebuchadnezzar began, and he said, how great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. Daniel 3:33. Nebuchadnezzar, was convinced that, God is real. Rabbi Yitzchak says molten gold should be poured into the mouth of that wicked person, Nebuchadnezzar. His mouth should be sealed in the course of an extraordinary death. In deference to royalty, Rabbi Yitzchak suggested that gold would be used to accomplish that task. Talk about being the sadness of getting what you wished for, right? Nebuchadnezzar wanted all this wealth. Well, let him have molten gold pour in his mouth and kill him that way. And the reason is that if an angel had not come and struck Nebuchadnezzar on his mouth to prevent him from continuing his praise of God, he would have sought to overshadow all the songs and praises that David recited in the book of Psalms. But, he was cut short and died an untimely death, the wicked Nebuchadnezzar. And the sages taught in a Baraisa 6 miracles were performed on that day, that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were delivered from the furnace, right? A story we read in the book of Daniel. And they are, the furnace rose from where it was sunken to ground level, and the furnace was breached, and its limestone dissipated, and the graven image that Nebuchadnezzar established, with which he commanded his subjects to worship, fell on its face, and 4 ranks of officials from monarchies who stood around the furnace were burned. And on that same day, in another location, Ezekiel revived the dead in the Dura Valley. And the knowledge that all of the miracles were performed is based on a tradition. And the 4 ranks of officials from monarchies that were burned is related in a verse, as it is written, Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the satraps and the prefects and the governors, the counselors and the treasurers, the justices and the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces. Daniel 3:2, and you can hear the echoes of the book of Esther, right? Achashverosh sending edicts to the satraps and governors and the rulers of all the provinces. Well, yeah, because this was the same Babylonian throne that Nebuchadnezzar held, and then it was ultimately conquered by Persia. But it was not that much later that we're talking about the Persian Empire that succeeded and supplanted the Babylonian Empire and was headed up by Achashverosh. And it is written, there are certain Jews, they do not serve your gods nor worship the golden image you have erected. Again, similar to Esther, but this is Daniel 3:12. And it is written in the verse after, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah left the fiery furnace, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered and saw these men, Daniel 3:27, who emerged from the fire unscathed. And Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather 8 ranks of officials, and only 4 ranks witnessed Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah emerge from the furnace. So apparently the other 4 ranks were burned in the fire of the furnace. That did not kill these 3 Jews. They emerged unscathed, but these officials who had come to witness Nebuchadnezzar killing some Jews, they were killed instead. So the school of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov teaches, even during a period of danger, a person should not deviate from his prominence and demean himself. As it is stated, then these men were bound in their mantles, their tunics, and their hats, and their other garments, and they were cast into the blazing fiery furnace at Daniel 3:21. So even when cast into the furnace, they donned garments befitting their station. And where do we read something like this? That there was a rabbi in the Holocaust. I can't remember where and his name, but he was expecting the Nazis to come and take him away any moment, and so he slept in his finest garb because he didn't want to be taken out of the house and led away in chains and then executed in his pajamas. So every night he slept in his finest garment during that period of danger. The school of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov teaches, oh no, I just read that, befitting their station. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says, now we're at the top of 93a, the righteous are greater than the ministering angels. As it is stated, he answered me and said, I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not being hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods, Daniel 3:25. So Nebuchadnezzar saw 3 righteous people and an angel in the fire of the furnace and noted the presence of the righteous people before noting the presence of the angel. New subject. Rabbi Tanchum Bar Chanilai says, at the moment that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah emerged from the fiery furnace, all the nations of the world came and struck the enemies of Israel. This is a euphemism for the Jewish people themselves. In the face, and said to them, you have a God with capabilities like that? And you bow to the graven image? Right? This is exactly what we're often talking about, that non-Jews respect Jews who take Judaism seriously and don't respect other Jews. And you bow to graven images. And immediately Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah began and said, Lord, righteousness is yours, but we are shamefaced as of this day. Daniel 9:7. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that Rabbi Yonasan says on a similar note, what is the meaning of that which is written? I said, I will climb into the palm tree. I will grasp its boughs. Song of Songs 7:9. So I said, I will climb into the palm tree. This is a reference to the Jewish people who are likened to a palm tree as they are upright and have one heart directed toward their Father in heaven. And God continues, and now that I have tested them by means of the decrees of Nebuchadnezzar, I have succeeded in grasping in my hand only the one bough of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, as only they were willing to give their lives. Rabbi Yochanan says, what is the meaning of that which is written? Quote, I saw the night, and behold, a man riding upon a red horse, and he stood among the myrtle bushes that were in the depths. Zechariah 1:8. So what is the meaning of the phrase, I saw the night? So the Holy One, blessed be He, sought to transform the entire world into night, meaning He sought to destroy it, as there were no righteous people in the world. And behold, a man riding. So the word man is referring to no one but the Holy One, blessed be He, in this context. As it is stated, the Lord is a man of war. The Lord is His name. Exodus 15:3. So upon a red horse alludes to the fact that the Holy One, blessed be He, sought to transform the whole world into blood. Once He, meaning God, looked at Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, He was placated. Okay, there's righteous people in the world, I will not destroy it. As it is stated, and He stood among the myrtle bushes, Hadassim, that were in the depths, Bematsula, and Hadassim, right, myrtle bushes, is referring to no one but the righteous, as it is stated, and He raised Hadassah, that is Esther, His uncle's daughter, in Esther 2:7, and Hadassah is an appellation for the righteous Esther. And Metzula is referring to no place but Bavel, as it is stated with regard to the downfall of Bavel, or Babylonia, that says to the deep, Latsula, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers, in Isaiah 44:27. So immediately those messengers in the form of horses filled with anger and became gray, and those who were red became white. And Rav Papa says, conclude from it that seeing a white horse in a dream is a good portent for that dream, as it presages peace and quiet. The Gemara asks, and with regard to the sages, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, where did they go after their miraculous deliverance from the fiery furnace? As there is no further mention of them in the book of Daniel or anywhere else. So Rav says they died as a result of the evil eye, as everyone was jealous of their deliverance. And Shmuel says they drowned in the spittle of the nations of the world who held the Jewish people in contempt due to their failure to serve God in the appropriate manner. Again, the sages will keep telling us that, if a large enough percentage of the Jewish people turn away from God, the whole Jewish people is vulnerable. Right? And the more of us that turn to God and try to learn and try to fulfill the commandments, the safer the Jewish people as a whole will be. Right? So these righteous people died. They drowned in the spit that the nations of the world cast at the Jews because so many Jews had turned away from God. When God has so much power that He could save three righteous people like them from the furnace, if we would all be righteous, we would all be saved. But again, it's on the national level. The spittle. And Rabbi Yochanan says, what happened to Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and Azariah? They ascended to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel, and they married women, and they fathered sons and daughters. They lived happily ever after. The Gemara comments, this Amoraic dispute about what happened to them, did they perish from the evil eye or drown in the spit of the nations who had contempt on the Jews turning away from God, or did they live happily ever after? This Amoraic dispute is parallel to an earlier dispute between the Tanaim, the sages of the Mishna. As Rabbi Eliezer says, they died as a result of the evil eye. Rabbi Yehoshua says they drowned in the spittle. And the rabbis, the majority, say they ascended to Eretz Yisrael and they married women and fathered sons and daughters. As it is stated, Zechariah 3:8, hear now, Joshua the high priest, you and your fellows who sit before you, for they are men of wonder. Who are the people who had a wonder performed for them in that generation? You must say that it is Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The Gemara asks, and where did Daniel go? He certainly did not bow to the graven image, and he was not cast into the furnace. So apparently he was somewhere else. And Rav says he went to dig the great river in Tiberia. And Shmuel says Daniel went to bring choice alfalfa seed from a distance, and therefore he was not in Babel. And Rabbi Yochanan says he went to bring the high-quality pigs of Alexandria of Egypt. The Gemara asks, is that so, that he went to bring pigs? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that Theodosius, the doctor, says no cow or sow emerges from Alexandria of Egypt whose womb is not severed so that it will not give birth? So the Gemara answers, they were small pigs that he brought without the knowledge of the people of Alexandria. And the sages taught 3 were partners in that plan to ensure that Daniel would not be in Babel when the decree of persecution was in effect. The Holy One, blessed be he, Daniel himself, and Nebuchadnezzar. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, let Daniel go from here so that people would not say that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were delivered from the fiery furnace due to the virtue of Daniel, rather than due to their own righteousness. And Daniel said to himself, I will go away from here so that this verse will not be fulfilled in my regard. The graven images of their gods shall you burn with fire. Deuteronomy 7:25. Daniel was concerned that because Nebuchadnezzar worshipped him like a deity, his legal status was that of an idol and he would be burned. If Nebuchadnezzar was worshiping Daniel, then, we don't commit idolatry, and we don't want to be thought of as idols. We don't want to participate in that in any way, because a human is not a god and cannot be an idol. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. And Nebuchadnezzar said, Daniel should go away from here so that people will not say that Nebuchadnezzar burned his God in fire. And from where is it derived that Nebuchadnezzar worshipped Daniel? It is derived from a verse, as it is written, then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an offering and pleasing aromas to him, in Daniel 2:4-6. I don't know if that's after the episode of the writing on the wall, but that's where we're going to knock off today. And let me get a couple of questions. Ifa says, light is often equated to knowledge. If a house with insufficient light cannot have tsaras, then how can a lack of knowledge be treated without mercy? Right. But it's also, so this house can't be condemned, right? A house that can't be, stated as having tsaras, okay, it won't be torn down. But, it won't be torn down as a matter of tsaras. It could still burn down. And who wants to live in the dark, right? So that was really only being used, I think, as a metaphor for this idea that, it can't be condemned for tsaras if it's too dark for the priest to see whether the stains are actual tsaras or not. More likely it was just a temporary matter, and eventually, they can open the windows. It's just that the priest can't see it. If he can't see it, he can't condemn the house. But we shouldn't be living in the dark, right? It really was just a metaphor. It is certainly not good to sit in the dark. In fact, that's why we light Shabbos candles, so that we won't sit in the dark on Friday night when we can no longer kindle lights. But having a house illuminated for Shabbos is definitely a good thing, and I think consistent with your idea that light is equal to or is suggestive of knowledge. Bill, But if the dry bones were the children of Ephraim, why did God tell Ezekiel that these bones were the whole house of Israel? Doesn't it make more sense that this was a spiritual showing or strange thought that God carried him through time and showed him the last day? Unclear, right? And that's why we definitely did not have a final word of who were the dead that Ezekiel revived. These were just possibilities, right? Possibilities. And it seems like we spend more time on the idea that it was these youths in the Dura Valley, who were killed at the time of the Babylonian exile. And finally, Yosef. One of the things I saw in Israel was the Holocaust Museum, and outside of it is a monument to the resurrection passage from Ezekiel. Yeah, it's been that passage gets used metaphorically for a lot of different purposes, including this idea that here we've been longing, for our land for 2,000 years, and then in the wake of the Holocaust and the greatest conflagration in Jewish history, just a few years later, Israel is born and the Jewish state is existing again. Now, it's problematic because, it's the state of Israel and we love it. But it is not a Torah-based state, right? It's not, Mashiach hasn't come and created a sovereign state under Torah law, right? It's a secular government that does have respect, in many cases for Torah law and for Torah scholars, but in other aspects and elements it doesn't. So, problematic. And that's why people like to refer to the state of Israel as the first flowering of the coming of Mashiach, because so many things are possible. We don't have the Holy Temple rebuilt, but we have yeshivas all over the Holy Land where, children and young men and people of all ages are learning Torah in a very significant way. And we're praying at the Western Wall, etc. So it's this kind of in-between state, which perhaps is kind of like the resurrection of the dead by Ezekiel, where it was not the full resurrection of the dead at the end of times, but there was a resurrection of the dead. And in that sense, maybe this is like the beginning of the resurrection of the dead by having a state of Israel. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great